Hello and welcome to Future Procurement. My name is Robert Freeman, and today I am very excited to welcome Levon Hovsepyan. Hello, Levon.
Hello, Robert.
Levon is a public procurement expert, and today Levon is working in International Development Law Organization. Did I say it correct, Levon?
That's very right. Yeah, very correct.
I know that you are a very experienced procurement professional, and I think it's fair enough if you would start with saying some short background of who you are and how did you come to the position where you are today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Robert. Yes, I'm, as you said, I'm a public procurement expert with some 20 years of focused international experience and work experience with major international organizations, basically the world's best organizations, I would say. I'm still working in one of the world's best organizations. That's true. I mean, I've been working for, this year marks 20 years of my procurement experience. Wow. So I've been working for UN agencies, development banks, international organizations, think tanks, and I never changed my profession. So I'm in procurement. Procurement became my passion.
Nice. And it was always public procurement, right?
It has always been public procurement, yes. Sometimes procurement auditing, sometimes procurement trainings as well, but everything around public procurement, public and international procurement, basically.
So just for me and our listeners to understand it better, maybe you can share on a general level, on the helicopter view level, what are kind of activities that you are involved in today?
Well, today my organization has different projects in, let's say, 16 countries right now. And we are involved in basically supporting the governments to advocate and promote the rule of law. And we are in different types of activities from, drafting the laws, training the judges, renovating courthouses, and activities as such, organizing workshops, legal aspects, working with ombudsmen, working with ministries of justice to support them in their day-to-day activities and to support the rule of law in different countries. We are almost in all the continents. This is what I do today.
Interesting. You mentioned rule of law, you mentioned courts, and can you connect this to procurement and maybe describe how improving the situation with the courts and rule of law can improve procurement and public procurement particularly going forward?
That's a very good question. Law is very related to procurement. Basically, procurement is the combination of skills. And if I even go back to, what is procurement basically? It's spend management. And public procurement is the management of the spend of the entire country, like taxpayers' money. So the importance and effective, management of procurement doesn't even need any additional proof. The role of procurement, in any country is not just to cry out loud to be noticed, because indeed the importance of public procurement can hardly be argued. But the role is procurement is to provide so much value, so it cannot be ignored. And of course, if coming back to your question, knowing how important public procurement is for development, we still lack the recognition of public procurement or procurement as profession, indeed, we still lack, let's say, the degrees in public procurement offered by, top 50 universities. There are very few universities now who offer courses or degrees in public procurement. Instead, we should approach that more seriously. And because public procurement is a combination of numerous skills, I think public procurement students should be taught those skills as subjects, such as law, as you said, such as finance or negotiation skill, logistics, or even marketing, because we will be marketed numerous products and services in the future. And knowing those basic marketing hints and tricks would only help us to negotiate better. Even subjects related to personal discipline, because discipline is, let's say, it's a must in procurement. A small example, Robert. The moment I received your invitation to speak for this episode, I could bet it was coming from a procurement guy, because the message was so disciplined, so precise, clear, complete. And yeah, it was. I mean, it was telling all I needed to know, giving important details: when, how, what, how to schedule. So that is one of the, and I mean, if we look at the law as well, law should be very clear, precise, etc. So it's so similar.
Nice, it's a good connection. So maybe one more question before we really have a deep dive into these transformations which you are helping with to the governments and to the developing countries in particular, as we discussed a little bit before we push the record button. Tell us, because most of our listeners are still working for private companies in procurement organizations, and maybe like 30% of our listeners are in public sector. Tell us a bit about the biggest differences you would describe between public and private companies running procurement.
I would say, and it's not a secret, the biggest difference is that private companies, they don't have to organize tenders, and they don't have to prove to public that they spend their funds effectively, because that's their own funds. That's the funds that their board, let's say, is authorized to spend the way it wants. But in public procurement, we spend taxpayers' money, and we have to make sure that we spend it effectively, efficiently, and transparently. And that's a must. And speaking of the challenges that public procurement sees, indeed, e-procurement and software is one of those biggest challenges that we face today, because of the reasons we spoke earlier. Actually, public procurement is not that recognized as a profession as well. We don't have many, e-procurement systems created specifically for public and international procurement. Mostly, those systems are coming from corporate world, from corporations. So what I mean by that is they miss this tendering module in them. And therefore, they are being more or less adopted to public procurement realities. And as a result, we get these big, non-flexible, not sexy, heavy monsters, which normally don't function properly. I won't name the country, but I saw an e-procurement system where it's easier to get the citizenship of that country than to register as a vendor in that system. It's very heavy, very heavy. So yeah, of course, there are many other differences. Basically, the role of public procurement is to create additional value for public. It's really to create an additional value. It's to create public good. Well, the role of procurement in corporations is, the main role is to, serve the corporate interest. And that's normal. That's okay. That's why it's called procurement.
Interesting. And you said very, very powerful word, like value for public, right? And now, Levon, talking a little bit about that, maybe elaborating what is a potential value that public procurement can bring to society. Because when, honestly, I hear about public procurement in the news, it's never good. You know what I mean? And how to really explain to the public what is the good service that public procurement is bringing to them.
Yeah. There are so many misperceptions of procurement, of public procurement in particular. And one of the biggest one is that procurement is when you buy the cheapest. In reality, actually, that word is even banned among my colleagues, because we never say cheap. We always say, because, it speaks about quality as well. We always say either lower priced or lowest priced, etc. The truth is, before even coming to price, public procurement should evaluate every offer against so many other criteria.
Yeah, exactly.
Today the developed countries, they promote sustainability, they promote green procurement, they promote innovation in procurement, and that's very important. Actually, procurement shifted the world's history in 20th century, I would say, public procurement, because of its orders for different industries, and that created a lot of startups that eventually became corporations and enterprises, and but the money were coming from the government, from the taxpayers, and that's a boost that public procurement can give to any industry, and of course, the image of public procurement is different in different countries as well, and that's a very good question, because we cannot approach every country similarly. Procurement is all about examples too. Products and services that are considered good in one country might be unacceptable in another country, and vice versa, because countries are different, legislations are different, markets are different, even climates are different, and taxpayers have different priorities.
Interesting.
Especially, if we talk about sustainability, there cannot be a cookie-cutter approach to public funds that, applies to all countries. Of course, there might be, and there will be specific common rules, principles, and measures that are applicable to all countries. But circumstances in different countries are different. And I don't know. I'll give you another small and simple example.
Yeah.
I won't name the organization. I won't name the country. I won't name the project. In one of my projects, we had to buy vehicles for one of our offices. And the city we worked in was mainly controlled by criminal gangs, not government forces. And any new vehicle would attract attention. It might potentially bring to hijacking of that brand new vehicle. And our staff might be injured or harmed. Therefore, we had to buy used vehicles, which are not that attractive for hijackers. So, for public procurement, for procurement officer generally, it's a challenge, because while you compare a new product to a new product, it's easier. But when you compare, Volkswagen Touareg for, let's say, from year 2008 with some 200,000 miles, with Toyota Land Cruiser from 2007 with 150,000, and another Nissan Patrol and many other offers like that. So what is the best? And the challenge also is, how would you, the warranty period is gone for all those cars. And that's not an easy choice. And how to explain that to the auditors in the future, because auditors are auditing public money spent, taxpayers. So challenges like that, but that not might happen in every country. Of course, that's a specific country. You should approach, with creativity.
Interesting, and really, really bright example. I like it a lot, and it completely, and also the way you describe it made me think in a completely other way about public procurement. So you are shifting my mindset now. Thank you for that, Levon. As we talk, really. Good. And you said in the pre-talk that your missions are mostly in developing countries. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
And what would you see as the main challenges in such developing countries? How procurement is different in these particular countries?
I would say, the governments of UN states drafted very important sustainable development goals. And those are really very beautiful, very clear, very, let's say, ambitious goals. But can we achieve those goals if procurement fails, for example? Can we, let's say, fill in the water tank if the tank leaks? In other words, if we don't manage our spend properly, the water will disappear sooner or later. And what sustainability are we talking about then? That's how I think it's very important. Again, I'm preaching about profession too much, let's say, advocating for procurement, for recognition of procurement as a profession. But I truly believe that it's simply impossible to reach those indeed noble goals if procurement fails. because if your water tank leaks, it's impossible. I mean, it'll be gone sooner or later, the water in there.
I think I will use this phrase for the name of this podcast episode. It's so bright analogies you give. I like it a lot. Right, so you are talking about this leakage in the water tank, and you mean now about some gray schemes, if we would say like that, or do you mean about the procedures which are not really established for these kind of developing countries and public procurement there, or what exactly is making these leakages?
Both,
to your opinion.
You mentioned two very correct examples. I mean, both examples, I would say. Legislation, very important. And, the legislation, sometimes when I read some laws, they look like a procurement guy is a police officer and bad policeman in this scenario. But in reality, that's a person who should support the process and provide, solutions. And of course, corruption risks. I think I spoke about that in one of my interviews. That has very much to do with inner discipline and values as well, because we should approach that by educating both our colleagues and the market as well, and the vendors as well. It's impossible to control that if the system of values is not injected into our colleagues, into procurement officers, especially in developing countries. When there is a tension, the country is hardly surviving, and there are lots of money accumulated somewhere, and you are responsible for spending that money. It's hard to control it by, let's say, police methods only. Of course, the justice should be there, the rule of law should be there, but I think we should also, speak about values and purposes and goals. Yeah, that's very, very important.
Fantastic, and very, very good point about involving soft factors. And we talk about this a lot also in the private sector, in the corporate world, procurement organizations. And of course, the routines and the procedures are super important, and of course they influence a lot to the success of the procurement job. But these soft factors can play even better role, I believe. Is there any should I call standard vehicle or like methodology that you follow when you enter with a new mission to a country? How would a typical what would be the typical steps that you take when entering with a new mission to a new country, for example, which has a problems with public procurement?
That's a good question. I always try to convey this message to my colleagues who work in procurement. I always remember that procurement, first of all, is a support service. You are supporters. You are, let's say, supporting bigger, more important goals. And that's a very important mission. And therefore, your attitude should be supportive too. Whenever your client approaches you with a problem or an issue, make sure not to acknowledge the issue and, nod and say, yeah, that's a problem. But give more than one solution if possible.
Yeah.
And reasonable solutions, workable solutions. Show steps towards the target and, explain the whole chronology, let's say, of events to the client. And work with the client to achieve that goal, because your role is to help the client to achieve the goal.
Interesting. In case of public procurement, who is a client?
That's any public institution, any public entity, which means basically the public, which means the citizens of the country. And it's, it gives a lot of satisfaction, motivation to realize that you did something for the country, for the citizens. You provided additional value, or you, let's say, stopped some wrong things happening. It really gives a lot of motivation, I would say. I was in a project sometimes it's not visible from the office, but we were building hospitals in 70 villages, and we would equip them. We would, provide training to staff. We would provide them with ambulance vehicles, and doing all that actually from the office is one thing. But then I decided I had when my leave period came, I just left the office and I took my car. I started traveling from the village to village just to see the results of my work. Yeah. And believe me, when you don't even introduce yourself, when you speak to the staff, just ask them about the challenges, how about this medical furniture that you received, etc. Oh, it gives, Robert, it gives the real satisfaction, I should say.
Fantastic. How can you, because on this podcast, Levon, we are also trying to find some extra motivation and inspiration for our listeners and for people who are working in procurement. And of course, such stories as you have just said is like, wow. It's like a mix of emotions and like proudness that you describe is of course very powerful. But where can people on the day-to-day basis, if you work in your office as you just described, and you don't really see the big changes going on, I mean, where to get this motivation, where to get this source of like energy for everyday improvements in your work?
I would say network with colleagues. Share your experience with those networks, and because that experience is super important, especially in procurement. And again, just because of the reasons or the topics that we spoke about before, each example is so unique and different. You learn a lot from those examples, and you share the knowledge. You share approach. That's very, very. I would say network with your colleagues, and try to be. Try to ask questions, try to, share your, network can be anywhere. Today, LinkedIn is, let's say, the champion for those groups of procurement. There are many other procurement networks. Or I don't know, may I even offer you to collect the questions for your podcast as well and air them someday with some episodes? Just puzzling questions to air them and to collect the answers, because that's a powerful tool as well.
Let's do like this, Levon. Then I have the new part in my podcast, which is called Here and Now. I put a hashtag. Now I start using hashtags. I'm becoming cool. And I call this Here and Now with the exclamation mark. And let me then do like this. Here and now, you dear listeners, especially if you work with public procurement, give me your question. I will leave the form in the show notes to this podcast episode where you will be able to leave your question, very detailed question or maybe some kind of more general question, but try to be as precise as possible, like to solve your particular dilemma or challenge. And then if I do like this, Levon, I will use your words that you have just said and try, if I manage to collect enough questions, then try to set another discussion with you. Is it possible?
Fantastic. With pleasure, of course.
Could be great. So here and now, dear listeners, go to the show notes and put your question to Levon Hovsepyan, and let's see if we manage to have one more podcast answering those questions about public procurement. Great. And then one more topic that I cannot miss before we wrap up is about the eSourcing in public procurement. And I think, at least this is my perception, for public procurement, one of the vehicles that I hear a lot for developing countries to be more successful is this eSourcing or e-procurement. How would you describe this? Is it really working, and or still there are some challenges with that if you implement it?
It works in some countries and it doesn't work in other countries. And organizations as well. It works in some organizations and it doesn't work in other organizations. But it's a must. It will come sooner or later. The challenge here is to let's say, because let's be honest, we all depend on market. We all depend on what vendors offer. So there will be a day when vendors are as interested to create a proper public procurement, like, for example, Prozoro in Ukraine. It's a great tool. And, I'm coming from Ukraine, it just came recently, and I should say that the country goes through the challenges, and one of those bright lights that you see there is that Prozoro system that works. Of course, even that system has challenges. It's inevitable. There is always a room for improvement, but we should start. But we should be reasonable. Of course, again, I won't name the country, but I saw another country where it was declared by the highest authorities that from day B or day C, we are turning into e-procurement, while some of the countries, provinces, they didn't have even internet connection, but e-procurement was a must already. So we should approach this again, not with cookie cutter approach, but taking each situation personally. And I mean, each situation is different. Each country is different. Even each tender is different. If you tender for the same thing tomorrow market is different. So there is no, let's say, one formula for everyone, but we should think of the challenges before, imposing some, let's say, rules or regulations on authorities. That's very important. That's where, the demotivation or the disappointment comes, when you have to do something, but there are no tools for doing that thing. That can literally kill your motivation, of course.
I like it, Levon. And honestly, I'm now somehow in deep thoughts about your last phrase, and I think I will need some time to reflect upon it. And to me, what you said is still reflecting the core of your message that you said, 20 minutes earlier, was about the value that procurement should bring. So It's concentrating not about the way how you execute these things, but about the core, the value that you want to provide with your activity. And of course, e-procurement, if I understood you correctly, you see it as a tool rather than the survival kit to save all the situations. I mean,
absolutely.
So it's one of the tools possible to use to improve the situation, right?
That's right.
Which is in the end probably inevitable if you are developing further and further. Of course.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Similar like internet or Excel. I mean, it should be there. It must be there.
Correct.
Interesting. Super. And to wrap up this episode, the final bigger question I had for you, if I ask you about the skills for public procurement, which are soft skills and hard skills, which are absolutely recommended by Levon Hovsepyan to succeed in public procurement, what would it be?
I would probably repeat, but the first one I would mention is the skill to be supportive and helpful for the client. That can transform into negotiation skill with the vendor tomorrow as well, of course. But that's an important skill to understand that the client needs this. Sometimes, of course, the clients come with, and we all know, with impossible tasks. And that skill of being supportive will help you not to run away from that problem, but just to sit and discuss all the solutions or the possibilities and eventually come to a conclusion that is workable for every party. That's a very important skill. The first, just to have a supportive mind. Well, that's a good question. Yeah, discipline, as I mentioned, it's a must. It's simply a must in procurement. Yeah. I mean, you won't survive. You won't survive if you're not disciplined.
What about some hard skills? If I would just imagine like tendering process or like legal education or something like this.
That's a great question. That's why I truly consider procurement a combination of those skills, including legal. I'm pretty sure that public procurement degrees given to students, they should involve all those subjects because that's legal, that's finance, that's negotiation skills, that's logic, that's marketing, as we spoke about. Because that is you work with a market. You want it or not, you work with a market. That's contract management, that logistics. Those are all part of the procurement process because you eventually deliver the product or service, and that includes logistics as well. Supply chain management, and inevitable, absolutely, of course.
Like it, Levon, and very, very powerful ideas you have, and I really like the way how you also build your thoughts, and it makes me think, and I'm sure that for many of our listeners who are also not from public procurement, but from private sector, I mean, you also can get many of the good food for thought after this talk. Levon, in the end of our interviews, I normally ask our guests to have some big ideas or some practical advice, whatever it is on top of your mind, for our listeners that they can bring with them to build a better future procurement career. What would it be from you, Levon?
Robert, first of all, thank you so much. May I give one big practical advice, very big one?
Yes, exactly.
Because I see that you are you like the ideas that I'm trying to communicate. My big idea and my big plea and advice to our colleagues specifically would be: make procurement your profession until retirement. We want to see more people with, let's say, uninterrupted and focused procurement experience, because this is what our profession needs today. It needs you. It needs you guys to be the real professionals, to accumulate knowledge, to share knowledge, and to bring public value.
Great advice from a public procurement expert with 20 years of experience. Thank you so much, Levon, for your time and for your great ideas.
Thank you very much, Robert. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being with us until the very end of this podcast episode. Our guest was Levon Hovsepyan, and I'm really, really excited after this interview, and I really hope that you are also getting a lot of value from this discussion. As I promised in the episode, you can leave the question to Levon Hovsepyan. I will attach the link to the show notes where you can place the question around public procurement or around some of the details that Levon has mentioned and you want to find out a little bit more. So absolutely welcome, and I really hope that Levon will find another opportunity to answer those questions. Also, we would like to hear more from you around this podcast. Please send us your questions and your feedbacks to info@futureprocurement.net or via social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We're very accessible there. My name is Robert Freeman, and this was Future Procurement. We talk to you soon.